As America pressed deeper into hardship, the Depression kitchen became more daring, turning scraps, peels, and even weeds into warmth and nourishment. These next forgotten meals weren't just survival food, they were creative, comforting, and deeply rooted in family resilience. From soups that stretched a single potato to desserts made with vinegar instead of fruit, every bite tells a story of how our ancestors made magic with almost nothing. Let's uncover the next round of lost recipes that carried hope from stove to table. Potato peel soup, a humble creation that made every last peel count. During the Great Depression, even the parts of food we toss away today were seen as treasures. Take potato peel soup, a dish born out of desperation but carried by ingenuity. When families couldn't afford whole potatoes, they made do with the scraps, the peels, the ends, and the skins most would discard. In those lean years, waste simply wasn't an option. Peels were collected throughout the week, washed thoroughly and stored in cold water to keep them fresh. When there were enough, usually on a cold weekend evening, the soup pot came out. Onions were sautéed in whatever fat could be spared, bacon grease if you had it, or even lard scraped from the last can. In went the potato peels, along with garlic, carrots, and if luck allowed, a handful of diced celery or dried herbs from the garden. Water or weak broth was added, and the mixture simmered low and slow, transforming scraps into a warming, hearty broth. The starch from the peels helped thicken the soup slightly, creating something far more filling than it had any right to be. And if there was a splash of milk or evaporated cream available, that turned it into something resembling luxury. In many homes, this soup wasn't just a meal, it was an act of defiance against hunger. It told a family, we still have something. A slice of stale bread on the side turned it into dinner, a sprinkle of salt and pepper made it feel almost gourmet. Potato peel soup was never meant to be fancy, but it was deeply nourishing. It gave dignity to scraps and taught a generation how to stretch food with love and patience. Today, it stands as a quiet tribute to mothers and grandmothers who refuse to let anything, especially hope, go to waste. Cornmeal mush, the southern staple that filled stomachs from coast to coast. In the darkest years of the Great Depression, cornmeal mush became a lifeline, simple, hearty, and almost endlessly adaptable. While it had deep roots in Native American cuisine in southern kitchens long before the 1930s, this humble porridge became a national standby when families across the country were desperate to stretch every cent. Made with nothing more than cornmeal, water, and a pinch of salt, mush was the ultimate survival food. It required no eggs, no milk, and no flour, just a pot, a stirring spoon, and the patience to bring it to life. Housewives would slowly stir cornmeal into boiling water, watching as the mixture thickened into a soft, golden mass. It was filling, warm, and could be eaten plain, sweet, or savory, whatever the pantry could spare. In the mornings, it was served hot with a drizzle of molasses, a pat of butter if you were lucky, or even a splash of milk when rations allowed. At night, it might be poured into pans and chilled into firm slabs, ready to be sliced and fried the next day for a crispy, golden breakfast or dinner side. What made cornmeal mush so enduring was its versatility. You could flavor it with onions and salt pork for a salty bite or sweeten it with syrup for the kids. It was the blank canvas of Depression cooking, cheap, flexible, and filling. But more than just a meal, it was a comfort. In a time when the world felt unstable, a steaming bowl of mush provided something familiar and steady. It reminded people that no matter how little they had, they could still gather around the table with something warm to eat. Cornmeal mush wasn't glamorous, but it was loyal. And that loyalty fed millions during one of the hardest chapters in American history. Fried mush cakes, turning yesterday's mush into today's crispy comfort. If cornmeal mush was the workhorse of the Depression kitchen, fried mush cakes were its proud second act. Born from leftovers, these crispy golden slabs gave a dull, repetitive meal a whole new life, adding crunch, flavor, and a touch of indulgence to the harsh reality of food rationing. Families would take yesterday's cornmeal mush, pour it into pans, and let it firm up overnight. By morning, it was sliceable almost like a polenta loaf. Slices were then fried in bacon grease, lard, or whatever fat could be salvaged, transforming mush into a crispy on the outside, creamy on the inside treat. Served hot from the skillet, it was often topped with homemade apple butter, a spoonful of jam, or just a sprinkle of sugar. But what made fried mush cakes so special wasn't just the taste, it was the resourcefulness behind them. Nothing went to waste. In the 1930s, letting food spoil was unthinkable. Housewives became masters at reinvention, turning basic staples into layered meals that felt new even when they weren't. Sometimes savory, sometimes sweet, fried mush cakes were a versatile meal that worked for breakfast, lunch, or dinner. Some families added chopped onions or bits of salt pork into the mush before chilling it. Others would serve it with beans or canned tomatoes on the side. Across rural America, especially in the South and Midwest, these golden cakes became a symbol of stretching one meal into 2 or even 3. And while they might not have made headlines, they helped keep spirits high and bellies full. Today, few people even remember them. But for those who lived through the Great Depression, a sizzling pan of fried mush cakes wasn't just a clever reuse of leftovers, it was proof that with enough grit and creativity, even the most modest food could be made delicious again. Victory Garden Soup, a bowl of patriotism and perseverance. During the Great Depression and through World War II, America's backyards became battlefields not with bullets, but with beans, beets, and cabbage. The Victory Garden wasn't just a way to grow food, it was a movement. And at the heart of it all was Victory Garden Soup, a humble pot of nourishment that represented unity, resilience, and homegrown hope. Families were encouraged to dig up their lawns and plant vegetables to support the war effort and relieve pressure on public food supplies. It was a patriotic act, but also a deeply personal one. And every carrot pulled, every turnip harvested, had the potential to stretch a meal just a little further. Victory Garden Soup was the perfect way to use whatever the garden yielded. There was no fixed recipe, just a commitment to not letting a single thing go to waste. Cabbage leaves, green beans, corn kernels, diced tomatoes, potatoes, and onions often formed the base. A handful of herbs or a leftover bone for broth added flavor if you had it. Otherwise, water and salt did the job. The soup simmered slowly on the stove, filling small kitchens with the smell of simmering vegetables and quiet determination. Served with a slice of bread or cornmeal cakes, it could feed an entire family and sometimes even a neighbor or two. What made Victory Garden Soup so remarkable wasn't its ingredients, but its story. It came from the earth, from hard work, and from the idea that every family could fight hunger with a hoe and a little patch of dirt. It was frugal, yes, but also empowering. In today's fast food world, it may seem quaint. But to those who lived through ration stamps and war bonds, this soup wasn't just sustenance, it was strength in a bowl. Molasses cookies, the sweet treat of sacrifice. In an era when sugar was rationed and every indulgence felt like a luxury, molasses cookies offered a rare and welcome taste of sweetness. These dark, chewy treats weren't just desserts, they were a symbol of clever substitutions, wartime sacrifice, and the enduring American sweet tooth. During the Great Depression and especially throughout World War II, white sugar became a scarce commodity. Housewives had to stretch their pantries, and one of the most ingenious workarounds was molasses, a thick, robust syrup left over from refining sugar cane. Unlike refined sugar, molasses was more readily available and packed with flavor, which made it a staple in Depression-era baking. Molasses cookies took full advantage of this. They were usually made with flour, baking soda, salt, spices like ginger and cinnamon, and a generous helping of molasses to give them their signature dark hue and deep, rich taste. Lard or shortening replaced butter, which was often too expensive or simply unavailable. The result was a chewy, spiced cookie that filled the kitchen with warm aromas, one of the few luxuries children and parents alike could enjoy without guilt. These cookies were often packed in lunchboxes, offered at church gatherings, or saved for Sunday evenings when something sweet was deserved after a hard week's work. They were simple, sturdy, and inexpensive, but they tasted like hope. And what's fascinating is how these cookies traveled through time. From coal miners' cabins to farmhouses, and eventually into military care packages, molasses cookies stood as a quiet testament to the resilience of home cooks who made something comforting out of almost nothing. Today, in a world of elaborate desserts and gourmet pastries, it's easy to overlook something so humble. But when you bite into a molasses cookie made from an old Depression-era recipe, you're tasting more than molasses, you're tasting resourcefulness, love, and a memory baked right into the dough. Bread pudding, a second life for every crumb. Bread pudding wasn't just a dessert, it was a philosophy. In Depression-era America, nothing went to waste, especially not stale bread. When times were hard and budgets tighter than ever, home cooks learned to stretch every ingredient. And that's where this humble, heartwarming dessert came in. Born from frugality, bread pudding gave old, dried-out bread a second life. Rather than tossing it, families soaked it in a mixture of milk, eggs, sugar, and whatever spices or add-ins they could afford, usually just cinnamon or a splash of vanilla. If someone had a leftover apple, a handful of raisins, or a few dollops of fruit preserves, it was a feast. Once baked, that plain old bread turned into a golden, custard-like dish with a crisp top and a soft, almost cake-like center. It filled the home with comforting scents and filled bellies with warmth. Often served warm, sometimes with a bit of evaporated milk or a thin sauce if there was enough sugar to spare, bread pudding was less about indulgence and more about ingenuity. Families passed these recipes down through generations, not for their extravagance but for their practicality. It wasn't just dessert, it was a lesson in resourcefulness, a reminder that delicious food didn't need to be expensive or fancy. Just thoughtful. And during wartime, bread pudding played another role. It brought back memories of better days. Soldiers and families separated by distance and ration stamps both found comfort in dishes like this, which tasted like home even when home was far away. Today, bread pudding has been rediscovered by gourmet chefs and food lovers alike, but its roots remain in those Depression kitchens, where love and leftovers were often the only things on the menu. Cabbage rolls, wrapped in survival, stuffed with hope. Cabbage rolls might seem like comfort food today, but during the Depression and wartime years, they were a masterclass in stretching scraps into sustenance. Families across America, especially immigrant communities, turned to this hearty, resourceful dish when meat was scarce and vegetables had to come from backyard gardens. At the heart of the cabbage roll is one simple idea: wrap what little you have in what's still growing. A large head of cabbage, cheap, plentiful, and hearty, was boiled just enough to loosen the leaves. Each leaf became a vessel, ready to hold a small spoonful of filling, often a mix of cooked rice, a bit of ground meat, if you were lucky, minced onions, and spices. Some used oats instead of rice. Others stretched the meat with breadcrumbs or mashed beans. Whatever was left in the pantry had potential. Once rolled tight like little parcels, the bundles were nestled together in a battered baking dish and covered in a simple tomato sauce. That sauce? Usually canned tomatoes or a mix of water and tomato paste, seasoned with salt, pepper, and a pinch of sugar if they had it. Then it all baked low and slow, filling the house with savory steam and the kind of smell that made your stomach growl even before dinner was ready. Cabbage rolls were practical, filling, and deeply cultural. Polish, Hungarian, German, Russian, and Appalachian families all had their own variations. Some were simmered on stovetops, others baked in ovens. But every version shared one thing: resilience. These rolls were about more than food, they were about holding together, about making something whole from the scraps. A leaf, a spoon of rice, a dash of hope. And when the meal was served, you weren't just full, you were reminded that even in lean times, something nourishing could still be made with care. Milk toast, the soft spoonful of simpler times. It sounds plain, doesn't it? Milk toast. But during the darkest years of the Great Depression and into wartime rationing, it was a quiet staple, a dish that held both comfort and necessity in one warm bowl. Milk toast wasn't about indulgence. it was about getting through the day with whatever was left in the pantry. Often served to the sick, the elderly, or young children, this humble meal was a way to stretch both calories and kindness. At its core, the recipe was exactly what it sounds like: toasted bread, usually slightly stale, broken into a shallow dish and covered with hot milk. But that's where each family added their own small twist. Some sweetened the milk with a pinch of sugar or a dab of butter. Others added cinnamon or nutmeg for a touch of warmth. In tougher times, the toast might be plain and the milk watered down, but it still brought warmth to the belly. This dish gained quiet popularity through home economics classes and cookbooks from the 1920s and 30s, often listed under invalid cookery recipes designed to be easy to digest and comforting. But beyond the sick rooms, milk toast was a real part of daily life. It was soft. It was filling. And it didn't waste a crumb. To those who lived through those lean years, milk toast wasn't just a meal, it was a reminder that even with little, something soothing could be made. A spoonful of warmth. A memory of someone, maybe a mother or a grandmother, gently placing a bowl before you, steam rising into the cold morning air. Today, it's almost forgotten. But for those who remember, milk toast isn't bland. It's nostalgic. It's survival, softened by care. Sometimes, it's the simplest meals that say the most about the times we've come from and how we held on, one soft bite at a time. Vinegar candy, the sour-sweet magic of hard times. In the heart of the Great Depression, when sugar was precious and store-bought treats were a distant dream, desperate hands turned to ingenuity and vinegar candy was born. It sounds odd at first, candy made with vinegar? But for countless families, it was the highlight of an otherwise flavorless day. The recipe was startlingly simple. Boil sugar, water, and a spoonful of vinegar until it reached the hard crack stage, then pour it onto a greased pan to cool and harden. Once it's set, it was broken into shiny, amber-colored shards, tart, sweet, and surprisingly satisfying. The vinegar didn't make it sour, instead, it brightened the flavor and kept the candy from being cloying, giving it a punch that mimicked fruitiness. Children would clutch these glassy pieces like treasure, savoring every bite as if it were a fine confection from a big city candy shop. It wasn't just candy, it was a sign that someone in the house still cared enough to make something special, even when there wasn't much to go around. Vinegar candy also symbolized a kind of Depression-era pride, making something out of nothing. Mothers and grandmothers who remembered Civil War recipes or pioneer tricks passed this down like a secret weapon against gloom. And in many cases, it helped keep spirits up just as much as stomachs. Today, few remember it. The name alone might keep modern taste buds at bay. But for those who lived through those hardscrabble years, or whose grandparents whispered tales of it, vinegar candy holds a strange charm. It was a small act of sweetness in a world that often tasted bitter. This was candy with character. Candy with a story. And one more reason we look back at those kitchen survivors with admiration. And just like that, we're reminded these weren't just recipes. They were survival, resourcefulness, and love, served on a plate. If you felt a spark of history today, don't forget to subscribe for more forgotten flavors that shaped America's table. Until next time, keep the stories simmering.